Join me as I take on a 2400 rated player. Did you guys know that being able to beat a 2400 player is very rare? In fact, uh, a player would be placed in the top percentile if they're able to do this. So I consider myself very lucky and grateful in this regard to have gotten this nice win. And let's see how it goes. So I have played this opponent before, Makalmisu from Serbia. So they rated 2,800 and I've beaten them before, but the previous game was more luck. This game was actually a full proper game. So let's see how it went. I started with 1 to d4, going for a queen's pawn game. My opponent then plays the Dutch defense, which is not really what I expected. Generally, you would see a one knight f6, maybe one e6, followed by the more traditional systems going for d5 or g6, your King's Indian setups. I go c4, just playing normal principled moves, one knight f6, two knight f6, knight c3, g6, which is now the queen's variation of the Dutch defense, the queen's knight variation, g3. So I'm following like a more Catalan-esque setup here. Of course, it's not because there's no play in the center from my opponent yet. It's playing more on the flanks, the f pawn, f for flank. The center would be these pawns, right? So bishop g7, bishop to g2, and now castles. Here the engine recommends knight h3, and knight h3 is also just a nice alternative square of knight f3. In this case, because you can get the d6, e5 pushes, which could be problematic in the long run. So knight h3 is also just to prepare for castling and to plant your knight maybe on f4 in some lines. But the main reason why knight f3 is played is to advance the knight into castle to make space for the king and rook. So after castles, I do not go knight h3. I go knight to d5, which of course is a bit of a sideline. As you can see, no game in the database has had this move. And I thought to myself, well, it's clear that my opponent is playing extremely quickly because if you can look at the clock time there, my opponent has only spent 4 seconds and we're already on move 6, meaning they are blitzing out their moves. I spent a bit more time here, about 20 seconds, and knight to d5 could destabilize a bit. It is throwing away some advantage, not much though. It still keeps it quite level. I mean, it is quite equal. But knight to d5 really tries to destabilize, as mentioned. I would love to get a trade in. I wouldn't mind. I plant my bishop with a check. He goes e6, and I just go back to g2. In fact, I'll show the line. Knight takes. I would take with a bishop. He'll go to e6. I go back to g2. We get the normal game. Yeah, maybe knight e6 or d6. Then maybe I could think of e3 or knight even to f3 and this castle. All right, this did not happen though. In the game, after I go knight to d5, my opponent goes e6, d6, which he actually pre-moved. So it shows you that after he did not expect knight to d5. My opponent was maybe expecting move like e3 maybe, or knight f3, or knight h3. Knight f3 is actually the most commonly played move here on move 5. But this move is to destabilize a bit. In fact, we could have even went, because he pre-moved d6, we could have went queen b3 even. Because queen b3 and d6 pre-move, you immediately losing a pawn. Okay, it's not winning or anything, but very decent. Yeah, you enjoy a pawn up slightly better, and knight to d7, you're probably just sliding your queen on this diagonal. If you really want to be fancy, you could do stuff like this, but not needed to go that far with your queen. So yeah, he pre-moved d6 after I went knight d5, and I took on f6, takes, and now we notice that there's some weaknesses here. This f file is open. I got the h file to work with, though I didn't go h4 immediately to try and hit on the flank, um, which is a very like Alpha Zero-esque idea. And I mean, we could go h4 here, no problem, because g3 bolts for h4 and h5. Of course, if it takes, we have prospects here, eh, with the queen to d3, some ideas on the h file. So I go queen to b3. But rushed. Queen to d3. Um, we would think hangs the pawn, but it doesn't. Remember, I have a bishop and a queen hitting on b7. But after queen b3, my opponent goes c6, defends this threat, and here I should just go c5. As the engine suggests, c5 throw a check, and he could even go here, and the game just continues. Well, the engine suggesting king to g7, but I think the humans would just go d5 here, and the game continues. Nothing much to play for. Right, but after queen b3, as stated, my opponent goes c6, and now I go h4, a move later. So I'm hanging my d4 pawn, which I overlooked, to be honest with you. He took on d4 correctly, and yeah, I can just go h5 and thrust forward, right? Actually, I'm going to turn this off. So h5 now, I was thinking my opponent will go queen b6, and after queen b6, I'm not sure really what to do. Um, it would force my queen to take more passive steps because let's say we turn this on again, queen b6. If I trade off here, it's just not good for me. I'm just down a clean pawn, and I'm playing again an endgame against a superior opponent in rating at least, and this would be too easy for him to play. So, although yes, I love trading queens going to an endgame, not in this circumstance because we already just hung a pawn for nothing. So now we got to try get dynamic play. So after this h5, my opponent doesn't go queen to b6, which I was very surprised at. So my opponent's obviously going knight a6 to try get his knight on c5 and hit my queen. In return, I go H takes G. I mean, it looks good. I have the H file to work with. I'm dreaming of ideas of maybe G4, Queen H3. Of course, it wouldn't work immediately. But let's just imagine after it takes. The pawn was maybe there on G5, and if the queen could slide, we have something to work with. Also, the discoveries with the C pawn, pushing the C pawn with check. Obviously, it's not anything winning. Black is still better now. But we can cause some confusion. If anything, White's got more firepower at this moment in time, like to thrust forward with, right? Black pieces are mostly on the 8th rank, the knight's on the rim, although yes, it's coming, and they have a bishop on d4. Not doing all that much. Maybe if they can get e6, queen f6 ideas, they could start doing something here, right? Or maybe swinging the rook over, to combat this. Okay, after h takes g, I go knight f3, just attacking the bishop. My opponent goes back to g7, plays it correctly. And here I go, bishop to e3 to try and stop this. And now, queen a5 with check would just force my king to f1. The game continues. Perhaps after, thinking queen a5, king f1, and maybe the bishop should move now or something. Or the knight comes in actually to stop this. Because then you just take with the queen. Because what happens in the game, and now look at this pawn structure, is beautiful for black. What happens in the game is my opponent doesn't go for queen a5 check. My opponent immediately goes for knight c5, which is also fine, but I take. And the reason why is, okay, I'm doubling the c pawn, which is very common in the Rossolimo. Um, but here, I thought for a bit, and I was like, let me go queen to e3. And queen e3 serves the multi-purpose. It's to hit on c5, that's the first one. And secondly, is to try and get up here in this diagonal, right? Maybe with ideas of queen g5, queen h4, getting the knight ready to hit here, stuff like that. Because if you can get the queen to h7 with the knight on g5, there's big problems for black here. So, queen to e3 then. My opponent blunders by going bishop to b2. Bishop to b2 is a blunder which I was trying to lure him into as well, right? I'm hanging my b2 pawn seemingly because I moved my queen away from the defense of b2. So I'm luring him into a trap here. The best move, of course, is to go queen f5, queen f5 check, and then king to f1 as we discussed. Because then, let's say he goes queen f5, king f1. Now, this would still be bad, of course, if you did this, right? But you drop your queen back to c7. Of course, there's no infiltration there on h6, right? And also, queen to c7 is also preparing to get the queen maybe to d6 and f6 to help here, right? With the bishop and the queen on the same line, this could be a very resourceful defense for black in stopping any such ideas, yeah? On with the queen, the rook, and the knight. because this is my firepower right now. So this is not followed then. My opponent takes on b2, blunders, and here I go queen to h6. The intention, of course, is just to go queen h7 and checkmate, right? So the best move for black is just to go king f7. I'll give a couple checks and king f6, and then I have to find some rook b1 to kick that bishop away, and the game goes on. But here my opponent blunders. Instead of running with the king, because the goal is for the king to run, huh? You have to, but it's so hard to find. And look at the time. I want you guys to notice this. This was a 10-minute rapid game. My opponent had only spent 40 seconds making these 16 moves. That's like in bullet chess that you would do that. or blitz. So king to h6. My opponent blunders by going bishop to g7. And it was in this position my opponent actually offered a draw, which I did not accept. So yeah, I was calculating. Of course, the first move is to go king to h7 and then king to f7. But yeah, I was looking a lot at the um, at knight to g5. Sorry, I was looking a lot at knight to g5, but knight to g5 actually draws because after that it's king to f6 and I have to go f4 to hold on now because he's coming with the rook to g8. Suddenly my queen is a bit trapped, and how are you going to find e4 in this position? It's so hard to find e4, right? Because there's a queen check coming. Of course, we want to get e5, right? King to e2, and let's say he allows e5, it's just checkmate in one, of course. Or if he goes here, let's say um, rook takes, it's also just a checkmate in one, as the knight guards f7 and e6, and the f4 pawn guards on g5. So this is the reason why e4 would be good, but it's so hard to find in that case. Instead, my opponent then, um, if I went knight to g5, that would have been the case. But I go knight to e5, and now my opponent just collapses. If he goes king to e6, the best moves well. We're just picking up too much material. This is weak. The king is naked. We're getting our rook to d1 as soon as the king goes to the d file. There's a lot of problems. So my opponent instead goes king to e8 and blunders checkmate in 2. And the winning sequence is then the simple queen takes on g6 with check. And the only way to block checkmate, which was also on move 19, my opponent resigned, is to go rook to f7 followed by the simple queen to f7 checkmate. So yeah, guys, that was how the tale unfolded in my match with my opponent Malkamisu, the 2400 rated player from Serbia, really top player. And yeah, that's how it looked. So I had two inaccuracies, and he had some small blunders here at the end. Prior to this bishop takes b2, the game was quite level, but better for black. But this lured him in, and it's important to note here why you would need to have, let's say, a knight here. If there was a knight in d7 here, you could just slide it to, okay, it'd still be bad, it would still be mate. But to run the king then, right? Because here now, you don't have time as this knight is just hitting. Because here, if he runs here, there is nothing special here, right? Here, as shown. Yes, it's slightly better. In this variation, you pick up a rook, or you'd repeat a bit, but still, right? Check king f1. White would be slightly better, but the moves are a bit hard to find. It's not really practical. So my opponent got a bit greedy, picked up the poison pawn, and it ended up costing him the game. So, yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. And if you found it insightful and like the content, please do consider liking, subbing, and commenting. It would mean a lot for the channel. And yeah, all the best with your chess. And take care. See you for the next video very soon. Bye.